Good evening. The mayor has convened the Beach Nourishment Workshop. Mayor Davey?
Here.
Nope. Well, I'm sorry. I'm not calling a roll call if that's okay. I didn't have it on.
I just do what you tell me to do, so you ask my question.
Turned it over to you.
Thank you very much. All right. I will turn this right over to the manager.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. So our goal tonight is to help the council members be brought up to speed by the beach team. With us this evening is Ms. Colleen Castile, Jim Davenport, Spencer Crowley, I think is somewhere around. He'll be here in a few minutes, and Mr. Tim Blankenship. The team has been working together very diligently since I've been here and probably at least a year or so prior to that. Right now, the services are being provided through a contract with Ms. Colleen Castile, and then Spencer Crowley and Jim are subs to Colleen. So moving forward, one of the objectives I hope to accomplish this evening is for you to see the work that we've been doing, what some of our goals are over the next short term, as well as some of the long-term goals that we have set forth. We want to make sure we're going in the right direction, that any questions that you as council members or that you've heard from the community have, that we can get through some of the technical questions to the extent there are any. And as for those 4 members who are brand new to the team, I wanted to be able to, at the most intimate level with the team, the beach team, to be able to share the work that we've done. And hopefully the work will speak for itself. And if there's nothing else, Mayor, I can turn it over to the team to present.
Let's go.
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members, manager, and citizens. I'm Colleen Castile, and I sort of head up the team, but it's a pretty powerful team, so it's kind of hard to manage because they manage themselves. The village of Key Biscayne hired us, and well, let me start back a little bit. The village of Key Biscayne has had a beach consultant on staff for at least since 2002, if not before that. And so Tim Blankenship has been the person who's been the engineer. He's been with a different company before that. He is with Moffitt and Nickel now. In the spring of 2017, I was asked to come down here and to make a presentation to you about what the options are for beach renourishment programs on the state level, and a little bit I touched on the federal level. The result of that was hiring me in 2017, and then by December of 2017, the team was expanded with with Spencer Crowley from Ackerman and Jim Davenport from Thorn Run. And I'll introduce everybody a little bit deeper in the next couple of slides. Here's what our team looks like. Of course, you guys answer to the residents of Key Biscayne. Andrea answers to you, and then Jake. Andrea assigned Jake Ozyman to be our contact. The team consists of myself, Colleen Castile, Tim Blankenship, Spencer Crowley, and Jim Davenport. And then on the state level, when we need somebody to go in and run point on appropriations, Fausto Gomez is your lobbyist in Tallahassee, and he has been helpful with us. With Tim, also Tim has a new team member who is here. Jackie Brower is an engineer. She is a Florida girl, I hear, but she is recently to us from California, and also serves in our military, and so we appreciate her service. I'm Colleen Castile. I spent probably 20 years in government working environmental policy. My last 8 years was under Governor Jeb Bush as a cabinet aide, and then as secretary to 2 agencies. Now I have my own business. I provide consulting on land use, real estate, conservation, and permitting. Spencer Crowley is the local team. Spencer is with Ackerman. He is also a Florida man, and he is with Ackerman, has been with them for quite a long time. He specializes in the permitting from the Corps, at the local level, working with Durham. He's very plugged in politically with the local politics here and has been considerably helpful on the local level in bringing together the right influencers. And he also is a member of the Florida Inland Navigation District, and through that has gained significant understanding and knowledge about the permitting processes from the state, local, and federal level. Jim Davenport is with Thorn Run. He has spent nearly 20 years with representing public entities. He mostly represents local governments and has a significant resources and reach with the agencies that we are seeking decisions from, the Army Corps of Engineers, at the federal and state and local level, as well as specializing in the beach projects and the beach funding opportunities. Tim Blankenship has 25 years of experience as a coastal engineer. His Key Biscayne experience is extensive, and I think he knows more about the Key Biscayne beach processes than I can certainly ever remember, and I've been talking with him for a year and a half, and it's just amazing at all of the history and where we've gotten to, and Tim knows that. I'm going to turn it over to Tim to give you a little bit of that brief history.
Can we ask questions as we go, or do you want us to wait till the end and bring them at you then?
Sure. This is an informal workshop, so if you have questions, feel free. Did you have questions for her before we?
No, that
Okay.
was great. Thank you.
All right. Just a little bit of background. We have a brief summary of background. If there's more detailed questions, from the council, we have like a slide deck with some graphics and other support. And I've talked to the council on many occasions just about some of the background. The beach erosion problems in Key Biscayne go back to really when Government Cut was constructed in 1905. As a result of the erosion caused on Key Biscayne back in 1962, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers initiated a study, and in that study it demonstrated that Government Cut was the main cause of beach erosion here on Key Biscayne. The first large-scale beach nourishment was constructed in 1969. That was the first beach nourishment by the Corps of Engineers. The largest beach nourishment constructed on Key Biscayne was in 1987. Again, that was a Section 103 project. Some of you may ever recall that project. That was before the village incorporated, and that was a project when the county was a local sponsor with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Obviously, in 91, the Key Biscayne incorporated. Not too long after the incorporation of the village, in 1997, the village implemented a long-range plan, which was essentially a master plan for ongoing beach management for the village to manage the beach themselves. The first large-scale project as a result of that long-range plan was the 2002 beach nourishment. Since 2002, there's been two more large-scale truck haul beach nourishment projects, one in 2012 and one recently as 2017. This team kind of came on board, led by Colleen Castile, with applications for beach funding through the DEP starting last year through the LGFR process. And then 2018, the team was brought on with Ackerman and with Jim to look at getting added to the Federal Shore Protection Project, which is a very unique opportunity because this opportunity only comes up every 50 years. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back to Jim. That's next.
Real quick question. You talked about the 62 study. Wasn't there another study done in the early 80s, like 81, 82?
Correct, Mayor. That was basically the 1982 EIS, which was done by the Army Corps of Engineers. That actually laid the groundwork and the design for the 1987 beach nourishment project.
So I'm just going to give you a brief touch on the three things that we did on the federal level. So there was three elements of a programming, sort of three paths that we followed. One was called, and they're called Section 103, Section 111, and the Shore Protection Project. And those are three distinct programs on the government level that we have made sort of On the federal level, it's an informal application until we get to a certain process. And we'll go over that. I'm going to let Jim talk about that. And Spencer Crowley is here. And Jim and Spencer talk about that, and then we'll talk about the state level programs that we have applied for.
Sure. Can you click the next slide?
Yes.
Sure.
Oh. Here we go.
Oh, yeah, the one more. I'll do that.
Yep, there you go.
Okay, great. Want to make sure we're staying with the order that we had planned. Thanks for having me down. I'm Jim Davenport. I'm with Thorn Run Partners, so I came down from Washington, D.C. this morning to meet with you all and talk a bit about our work. So I was brought on as part of the team last, I guess it was December of 2017 now, as the village council decided to get engaged and try to participate in the Dade County Shore Protection Project, which has a longer, fancier name, but I'll just refer to it as the Shore Protection Project. When I came down here and first presented to the council about over a year ago, the path forward at that time was to get you all involved in what's known as the Corps of Engineers Section 7001 process. That's a process whereby a local, and it's a new process, it's only been around for about 5 years. It's a process where a local government directly applies to the Corps to get a federally authorized project. And it can be a lengthy project. It's an annual process, but there's no guarantee you're going to get included by Corps headquarters. But what happened was, in my conversations with the project manager for the Dade County project, and that's the project manager at the Jacksonville Corps, Laurel Reichold, she had mentioned that actually we had a different opportunity, and the opportunity, as Tim mentioned, is this very small window that's happening right now. Because of the hurricane supplemental funding, the Corps of Engineers was given $2 million to proceed with the feasibility study to reauthorize the Dade County project for another 50 years. The feasibility study is something that has to be done in order to keep the project moving forward. With that study in front of the Corps at that time, she said, well, now is the time, if Key Biscayne wants to be included in this, that you all start communicating those needs to both the county and the Corps of Engineers. So that window opened up for us, and we saved a significant amount of time. Is it enter here or?
The arrow down.
Arrow down. Sorry.
That's all right. And then just arrow down.
Thank you. Okay. So instead of going through the Section 1001 process, we have started to move forward with being included in the actual feasibility study that the Corps is working on right now for the county. So we saved significant amount of time. We also saved additional time and money because the Corps was given $2 million towards that study through the hurricane supplemental bill. Now, typically with a feasibility study, it's a $3 million study, and it's cost shared 50-50. So in this case, the Corps has already stated that they will pick up the entire cost of the study. So we've got $2 million towards the $3 million project. That means that's $1.5 million. The county doesn't have to spend, or if they asked you for some money, you don't have to spend on that study, and that's significant because that does not happen often. So what we were asked to do is have your mayor, your mayor at the time, send a letter to previous mayor, send a letter to the county, and the county basically sent a letter back. That was required by the Corps. They wanted to see that the local sponsor being the county and the village were talking to each other and said, yes, this is how we'd like to proceed. So that needed to happen, and we did that right away. What I thought to strengthen the effort, what I always do with my projects, is to make sure your congressional delegation is behind you in this effort. So I reached out immediately to Congresswoman Ileana Ross-Layton, your previous Congresswoman, and talked to her about where we were and what we were doing. So she wrote a letter. Well, we wrote the letter for her, quite honestly. She adopted it, and we went around and got support from the remainder of the Dade County delegation. So you've got 5 members that represent Dade County. They sent the letter to the Corps, and that was last July. And the letter was, please include Key Biscayne in this feasibility study. The Secretary of the Corps acknowledged in a response to Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson also sent almost an identical letter. They acknowledged Senator Nelson's letter first and said, yes, Key Biscayne will be included in the study moving forward. So that was significant that the Secretary acknowledged right at the beginning that, yes, you will be included. Now, that doesn't mean the story ends, of course. We're still working on it. But so what does this mean as we continue on the feasibility.
Can I?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, but I wanted to make
go
sure
back.
we don't lose sight of
Yeah.
what we're looking for here. It's a
Sure.
lot of
Sure thing.
information on acronyms
Yeah.
and federal Washington.
And I'm used to only having a little bit of time with people on the Hill, so I can talk
No,
really
I know.
fast if I have to.
We love to stay here all night.
If I go back, you insisted on following the presentation thing that we have in front of us here. And so you jumped funding strategy and overview of local approvals page before you got to
Yeah, I
it.
did. I was going to turn that
Well,
back
and then
to
that leads me.
Spencer, I think.
Okay, but what I wanted to make sure that I understand, I attended a meeting that I was not supposed to speak, but they were kind enough to let me speak
Right.
with all the big shots from the Corps of Engineer. And I think, Mr. Crowley, and you were able to
You wanna
help
come
me with the talking points.
Sure.
And clearly, my objective was to be included in the study, which they had made a decision, as I understood it, that they were not going to include us in the thing. And we did your talking points and the map and all that stuff now. So if I go back to page overview of local approvals, is that now, are we now included in the study, yes or no?
Yes.
Well, hang on.
That's,
Yes, we are included as far as they're looking at us, but the study's 3 years long.
I understand,
So I
but
would
there was,
prefer to
let me
say
see if I.
we are included when it's done and we're written into it, but we are
Yeah,
included.
but they were literally, as I understand it, we were not going to be included in the study. The study wasn't stopped at South Beach,
Oh, right, yes.
correct?
They've-
It was,
Yes.
it was beach and the town immediately north of the beach.
Yeah.
And our argument was include us and look at the map, we're part of a continuous thing, which happens to be cut by government cut. So
Correct.
my question again, are we now included? Because the Corps of Engineer was very kind and everything else, but did not make a commitment. Then you referred to a letter, we have it on, that they are going to be included?
Yeah, there is a letter. Yeah, you all have
So,
it.
so we're going to be in this study, they're going to study Key Biscayne.
Good evening, Commissioners. Spencer Crowley, 98 Southeast 7th Street. The Corps of Engineers has agreed to study whether Key Biscayne should be added to the federal project.
okay.
Now, I think what Jim was saying when he said no is that they haven't made a determination that we will be part of the federal study. They've agreed to analyze Key Biscayne and whether or not they will be part of the study.
Okay.
And that was because, so the meeting that Councilman Laredo is referring to was a meeting that was held back in December here at the County Department of Environmental Resource Management Office. It was a NEPA scoping meeting. So NEPA is an acronym. It stands for the National Environmental Policy Act. Anytime the federal government is going to take an action that impacts the environment, they're required to go through the NEPA process. One of the steps in that process is a scoping meeting to determine the extent to which that federal action is going to cover. What's the scope of that federal action? So Councilman Laredo came, spoke in favor of adding Key Biscayne to the project, and they said, yes, we're going to look at Key Biscayne. Now the trick is to make sure they continue studying Key Biscayne and keep us in that feasibility study and ultimately make the determination that, yes, Key Biscayne should be part of this federal project going forward.
So to paraphrase it is, they agreed to consider.
They agreed to study it.
Study
to
it.
see
So
if
that's
we're
why I
gonna be
wanted
part
to
of the
make a
study.
clarification for you who were not
that's-
there.
that's
But
They-
it costs $2 million to consider us, yes?
3 million,
$3 million, and they're paying the whole thing.
they're paying the freight.
Yeah.
So that's a
Okay, but I
commitment.
wanted-
I'll take that. It's
No, I
good
understand,
faith.
but I wanted, it's a fine difference between being included in the thing, because they literally think that their jurisdiction on this area stops on the tip of South Beach. And we had some very good maps that help illustrate that so we are included in the study to answer our question, whether or not we're included.
In the program.
Now you've got me
Okay,
confused.
good.
Yeah,
Thank you for your
Spen-
help in that meeting, that was great.
Well, that's a significant question, because that's really why we're here to keep talking
Yeah.
to you all today, because the feasibility study is a long-term process, and we've got some slides about it. But at any point through that study, I mean, theoretically, if we're not staying in front of the Corps and continuing to work with your members of Congress, I mean, there could be a hiccup where they sort of kick us out, for lack of a better word. So that's why consistent engagement is important, and that's the slide that I'm talking about right now. It's
Just real quick, if you can give me an if you can give me an explanation, it'd be appreciated. Why wouldn't we be? I mean, we're the southernmost barrier island in the United
Right.
States. It seems sort of arbitrary to stop just north of that last barrier island in the United States.
Yeah, there's certain criteria, and we'll talk a little bit about it, but that you have to meet in order to be a part of a federal project, and you have to meet elements of parking and public
Okay, right,
access.
public
And those are
access
some
and
of the
all-
things
okay,
we're going
right,
to get
right.
into tonight.
That's what we're dealing with.
So,
Okay.
yeah, you have to kind of check all the boxes to be a federal project,
Got
and
it.
we got to make sure we got those boxes checked. So, you know, we got to stay in communication with the Corps. Your delegation becomes sort of a hammer on these things, and they can also come down and help meet with the Corps when you're meeting with the Corps. And also you've got Corps headquarters in Washington, and ultimately they can have some powerful oversight onto what's happening here in Jacksonville. I'll get a little bit into the feasibility study process, but I don't want to get too deep into it because it is a lengthy process. This is sort of an overview, but it basically starts, and that scoping meeting was an important start. And Councilman, it was great that you could make it and talk, and I think the Corps appreciated that. But it helps define a project, and we're hoping this project becomes bigger than it used to be. The local sponsor, and I want to be clear on this, when the Corps is looking at who is the participant at the local level right now, it's Dade County. We're trying to be added to that. So right now when the Corps looks down here, they say, oh, it's Dade County. We are not really part of what they consider the local sponsor. So again, we need to continue to communicate with the county and be vocal. You all have a responsibility in what you're doing today to communicate with the public about this. And through the process, there are notices that need to be posted. I think that scoping meeting, I think the county had to post that, I believe, or I know the Corps did, to make sure that that the public is aware of what path the Corps wants to take. The process itself changed a few years ago. The Corps came up with this new thing called 3x3x3 rule, but it basically means that there's 3 levels of review. The study will cost no more than $3 million, and it'll take 3 years. There's feasibility studies that are out there. One was at Port Everglades that went on, I think, for 17 years and cost a lot more than $3 million. So they were trying to get away from those problems. They come up with various alternatives. They look at the project and they come up with various ways to do it, and they ultimately decide on a final project. But it starts in Jacksonville. It makes its way up through South Atlantic Division, makes its way up to headquarters, and there's multiple levels of review. So, again, I don't want to get bogged down in all these details. I think it'd be maybe a good idea if afterwards you read through some of this part in the feasibility report. And then the challenges, as we started to mention, and I don't know if Colleen and Spencer want to join me for this part, with the quarter-mile access, public access. You have to have public access every quarter mile and sufficient parking. You've got you've certainly got some things here like Lime Bike and the scooter that helps with that. But we need some, there needs to be marked signage for public access as well.
How close does parking have to be to the beach?
The parking, how close is the park? The parking has to be a quarter mile too? Okay, the access is a quarter mile this way and the parking that way. Yeah.
So if you want, we can go through the public access diagram, because I think that's.
Is that our biggest hurdle?
Right now, to me, it seems to be. I think we would all agree.
Gotcha.
And you can't use the parks and look at Key Biscayne as a holistic area where we have the county park and state park?
We're trying to do that.
Okay.
I mean,
That was the core of my persuasive speech and used or tried to. And also, you really visually, like a picture is worth 1,000 words. When you really, we take it for granted, but when you see a aerial picture that includes South Beach, Fisher Island, and us, it's just. And I made that point that that's the only way to look at Key Biscayne, not the village of Key Biscayne, but 2/3 of it is parking for public.
yeah. So I don't know, do you have a monitor in front of you, or you're looking at the? Okay.
We don't have a
So-
budget for that.
So pardon me if I adjust so I can talk and look at this because it's not as clear on the computer screen. But this is a diagram that we did of Key Biscayne, and essentially what you see is the entire island covered with these sort of pink bands on the eastern side on the beach. It's a little bit obscured by the picture here, but all of the yellow lines that run sort of east-west horizontal roughly, those are public access points. And then a quarter-mile north and a quarter-mile south of each of those public access points is represented by a pink band. And everything from the tip of the island in the north, where the fossilized reef is, all the way down to about the center of the village is covered with sufficient public access. And then if you jump down into Bill Baggs, all of Bill Baggs is covered up to the southern edge of the village of Key Biscayne. And so really the only areas that are somewhat problematic from a public access perspective are the southern part of the village here. And so, of course, here you have one public access point that runs down, I believe this is Enid, where the beach, the village beach park is. And that, of course, is open to Village of Key Biscayne residents, but not members of the public. And so we've denoted that with a purple line here to show that there's a connection, but maybe not a sufficient connection for purposes of the federal funding. And then down here, even further on Seaview, there's another road and then an apparent walkway north of the, I think it's Casa Del Mar condominium. And so that's a gated access, and that's denoted by a red line, which is a little bit hard to see here. But you know, that's the only area that's problematic. So really what we're arguing to the core is that the public access for the entirety of the island is more than sufficient. We have a ton of parking, we have a ton of public access. Throughout the village, we've noted the bus stops here in blue. So if anybody wants to take public transportation into the village, they can take a freebie or line bike from those stops over to the beach and enjoy access to those beaches in the village.
Just a real quick question. How significant is Lime Bike's
Well, freebie is important. We need to have some
Lime
mode.
Bike's gone.
Yes.
I think Lime Bike is all out.
Okay, so we're aware of that. That it was, I didn't know they were officially out, but now that we have another mode, thankfully, the freebie.
Right.
So I think as long as we have some mode that takes people from the bus stops to the public access points, that's helpful for us.
And also, if it sounds like if it beefs it up, we actually have two different types of freebie. We have a loop that goes around the western part of the island and down Crandon, which could drop people certainly close enough to walk down the street to the beach, in addition to the on-demand.
Great.
It's really two different services with the same name.
Yeah, that's important to know
freebie loop.
because this is not a typical situation, as I'm sure you can imagine for the Corps. You know, their ideal situation is a giant parking lot, surface parking lot, right next to a public access walkover. This is just a different type of island, and I think we're doing our best to help them understand that and recognize that, but it's, you know, going to take our continuous effort as a group and as a team to help, you know, deliver that message.
And additionally, we just got a bike safety certification if you want to try to make the case that people just don't drive their cars to park near the beach. I think we got a bronze. They were just here. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, all of that helps. You know, we really need to build our story that, you know, this is a unique place and a different place. So
Does having more modes of transportation help us? And since we lost Lime Bike, should we be looking at other options that can help us in this effort as well?
Look, I think the more we can build the narrative that there's effective modes of transportation to get from one place to another and to get the public to these public access points, I think that's good. I would, hate to send someone off on a very long, laborious process to try to get something when it's hard to quantify exactly how much it helps. But, I think I could say in general, it's good to have as much as we can have is really good,
And I can add, Mayor, if I may, that the village, we are looking at alternatives to Lime. I know that the other rideshare companies have slowly been folding, and so perhaps there's a business model that we actually were looking maybe at partnering up with some of the local businesses in town that have bike rentals and see if they'd be willing to expand their operations. So we're looking at a couple different ways.
Great.
As it relates, because it goes back to your question, Mayor, to the Army Corps of Engineers, which I was very impressed with them, and I had an opportunity to talk to them afterwards. They were very open individually. But why are we now included? Because just never been included. So the hardest thing in government, particularly in Washington, is to
change.
Thank you. And so I think they're kind of open. But I think the argument and the narrative that we need to try to work on together, messaging, is the unity of the island. Because as it relates to access, if you park either in Crandon and or Cape Florida, you have unhindered access to all of Key Biscayne. There is no need for that map. It's just literally a question of where you park.
Yeah.
It's 2/3 of the island give you 100% access to all of the island, including in front of all condominiums, et cetera. We got to keep that concept of accessibility. I doubt, clearly we can beat almost all of South Beach, and they're included, because South Beach wouldn't meet the standard. We need to really pound on that message.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, we've done a similar analysis of Miami Beach, and we've depicted areas where they're deficient as per this standard. And so when we raise that with them, they say, well, that's part of what we're looking at is the restudy, the feasibility of this new authorized project. But it's something that we continue to try to hammer home. And you're right. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I dropped my son off here at basketball practice. I had an hour while he was at basketball. I drove to Bill Bags. I parked in the north parking lot and walked over to the beach and was able to walk up to Ocean Club and back in an hour, and then get in my car and get back and pick him up. So it's not, we're not talking about great long distances that can't be traversed. This is very, very accessible. So,
Councilmember Moss.
You talked about parking spaces. What about bike racks as being parking spaces for bicycles? Is just putting the bike racks helpful or not?
I think that'll be helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, as much as we can do to build this narrative, I think is really helpful.
Difficulty is the public access points, not a quarter point apart.
Yeah, I mean, right. So we have those two public access points to the north and south of Oceana. So those are effective crossovers right from the street network onto the beach. No question that they're there. They're public access. We have those. So in those cases, I think what we can do to help bolster the effectiveness of those is do things like bike racks, make sure the freebies know how to get there, all that kind of stuff. The other two places to the south on Enid and Seaview, those are the areas that we really don't have the requisite public access right now for the core.
Would opening up those two access points solve the problem?
It would be incredibly helpful, yeah.
Is that an option?
Not tonight.
Well,
We need someone with really good local knowledge of that area.
I wonder.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe it makes sense to look at the history of those and do some background research and see what, I'm sure they're obviously there's somebody's real property, there's an easement or some type of access agreement to some group. So it's something I'm sure the village could take a look at and
Okay.
Anybody else right now? We good? Okay, thanks.
There's usually a long story there, is what I said. I don't know why I felt the need to whisper.
So I'm gonna put the
And just,
presentation
I
back.
guess for the feasibility, and I apologize, you guys offered the chance, I just didn't have time to meet with y'all today. But as far as the feasibility study, what are they studying the feasibility of?
Well, remember, the Dade County federal project is expiring in 2025, okay? So right now, the federal government, their project is Miami-Dade County beaches from Government Cut up to Golden Beach, okay? That's their domain. And the Army Corps, they take control of it, they take ownership of it. So here, again, it's a little tough to see on this graphic, but everything from Government Cut up through Sunny Isles to Golden Beach is part of a federal project. That is all set to expire in 2025, with the exception of the Sunny Isles segment, which was added in the 80s, but that will continue. But the federal government is not able to continue participating until they reauthorize that. In order to reauthorize it, they have to do this feasibility study for the rest of the Miami-Dade County project. So that's sort of the serendipitous timing that we find ourselves in, is that and we knew this was coming in 2025, we all thought as a team, we're gonna have to wait until 2022 to even begin this process to get Key Biscayne as part of a feasibility study so they could study whether we get into the new project. So now that it's happening, it's really good timing that we're being considered, and we just need to sort of make sure they don't
We're a little
do
ahead of
something
schedule.
to kick us out. We're ahead of schedule. Sure, of course.
Sorry, I just want to answer your question a little bit further. The federal government has to determine that there's a cost benefit to participating in doing a project. So that's really what a feasibility study is, for the Corps to look at. Should we be investing federal tax dollars in whatever the project is? And here's the Dade County project. So they got to do that feasibility study, as Spencer said, to determine whether they want to continue it. I don't think there's any question they're going to continue it. The question here for us is, can they expand it?
Okay, and I don't want to stick a monkey wrench in here, but the 62 study and the 82 study both showed that the Government Cut has prevented the littoral flow of sand into Key Biscayne, which basically would be a natural renourishment of our beaches. Has that been raised as sort of an issue of, hey guys, but for the Government Cut?
Yeah, so it has been raised. One of the things that we did originally, going back to when we were starting, was we looked at all the different ways that everybody could help us, really. And one of the different projects is called the Section 111 project. That means that the Corps did a project, it impacted another jurisdiction, and so they have to, basically repay or, fix the problems. We asked to be included as one of those projects, but that's sort of like a one-time deal where they will say, all right, we did a project, it had an impact, we're going to fix it, but then our participation is finished. They decided not to include us in that, but instead to analyze those impacts as part of the reauthorization of the Dade County project. So again, in the letters that we're writing, and in the letters that should be forthcoming from Congresswoman Shalala's office and will be signed by our entire delegation, we're emphasizing that point, that the fact that there's been impacts from a navigation project to Key Biscayne, they need to be considered and needs to be additional justification for our inclusion within the federal project.
Good.
Not justification to kick us out into a Section 111, but additional justification to have us studied as part of that reauthorized project.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and there was actually a separate Section 111 project that was done on Virginia Key by the city of Miami, and the city of Miami was the local sponsor for that. They went to the Corps and they said, hey guys, as a result of Government Cut, we've suffered significant beach erosion on our island of Virginia Key. And the Corps said, you know what, you're right, and we're going to help you fix your beach. And they did. Unfortunately, it was a one-time deal, like I said, and it's a lot of it's gone away now. So
Right, because they keep dredging Government Cut. So
Well, and the flow has changed. So the problem is just going to keep
Well, but
the problem.
I mean, the problem gets worse as you keep redredging the cut, and they have that buildup on the south side or the north side of the break. But anyway, all right, so we're using that.
Let me just clarify on government cut. I mean, the damage started in 1905.
Right.
So it's been a complete littoral barrier, a
Right.
wall since 1905. If they dredge it more or less, it hasn't changed. I mean, the conditions have pretty much been the same since the 1900s.
Fair enough.
So like deepening it doesn't
May I
necessarily make
get-
the erosion worse, but remember Fisher Island used to be part of Miami Beach naturally.
Right.
And when they built government cut, they cut off Fisher Island from Miami Beach proper. And that's where all the problems started back in the early 1900s.
Let me just make sure I understood what you said. That did you just say that any subsequent and frequent and current dredging is not adversely affecting us anymore? The problem is already there from 1905.
That's correct. Yes.
So we need to get off the argument that they're dredging, that the current dredging that they need to do, accommodate more bigger ships, et cetera, is,
The damage was done in 1905.
yeah, that's
It's very
important to know.
But the same damage continues. It just isn't getting worse the deeper it goes.
I mean, it's a wall. You can't get much worse than a wall. So and that wall was present and very well documented from studies from 1962 and 1982, and very well documented by many different entities, not including the Corps of Engineers themselves. Yeah.
Right.
This is extremely important because this council is trying to build healthy, close, working relationships with our neighbors, including Miami-Dade Metro. And obviously, if we pound on something that obviously they have jurisdiction on the port, with good intentions, thinking that we're solving a problem and suffering that relationship, I need to get off that speech because the damage is not the people who are sitting in that commission now. It was done 100 years ago.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? I'm trying to get the message focused.
But as Spencer was mentioning, that's also been the push, that the federal government, meaning the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, has been causing the beach erosion here on Key Biscayne, again, for 100 years. So it's time through this federal shore protection project to have them help fund some of the remediation or some of the improvements as a result of that ongoing.
Right.
And they did the project in 1969, and they did the project in 1987. So they recognize that the problems caused by government cut back then. So now it's just a matter of re-educating and reminding them as part of the process, as part of the justification for adding Key Biscayne to the federal shore protection project. Not only is just their ongoing erosion, but the erosion is being caused by the inlet.
Right. Okay.
Needless to say, the Port of Miami is, I don't know what the number is, 65% of the economic activity of this community. Jobs, taxes, all of the things we know.
Okay, so we know the challenges with the feasibility study? Okay. The additional opportunity we talked about was the CAP 111, the Section 111 program. Our allies.
Yeah, I'll just mention really quick. I mean, we've talked about this. So in the last few weeks, Congresswoman Shalala is brand new. I mean, she's very savvy because of her previous experience in Washington. But you've also got Debbie McCursell-Powell is brand new, beat Carlos Curbelo. So I've been working with Congresswoman Shalala's office to get a letter for her to send to the Secretary of the Corps. She has agreed to send that. Right now I'm working on getting all the remainder of the House members to correspond to it. As of Friday, Debbie Wasserman Schultz has agreed to sign, but I believe we'll have Congressman Diaz-Balart, Congresswoman Wilson, and McCursell-Powell as well. So that letter is kind of reemphasize again some of these issues we brought up about parking. It's very similar to the letter you wrote, Mr. Mayor, about a month ago, I think we had you send it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Pretty sure it was your
Doing a lot of
signature on
letters.
it. So we need to keep these folks engaged. They're all members of Dade County. They got to work with the Corps. your members, the core headquarters up there, like I said, has oversight over what Jacksonville does, so we need them to weigh in. There's some other committees that we'll get to at certain parts of this project, like energy and water, but I'm not going to delve into that today. So,
If any of the Dade County delegation on the House or Senate side on the energy and water appropriations subcommittees?
sorry.
Are any of the Dade County
On
delegation?
the energy and water? No, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is on the Appropriations Committee. Congresswoman Frankel, who I work with tremendously on behalf of several clients, she is now on energy and water. She is brand new on that committee, so we'll be talking to her in the future. Go ahead.
So just a recap, you have a sheet that looks like this on your desk that I think it has 3 slides in it. And so on the federal level, we started out during 3 paths. That was the Section 111, the Section 103, and the shore protection. We eliminated the 103. We put on hold the 111, and we're moving forward with the shore protection. And that, as you know, is a long-term project. So what are we going to do between now and the time that we get approved as the project, as the Miami-Dade project? So that's working on the state requests. And in 2017, you all remember that you had, I think it was, what was the original, 29,000 cubic yards? A request to do 29,000 cubic yards of sand placement after Hurricane Matthew.
Irma.
And the state kind of put that back down to about 19,000 cubic yards because of impacts to seagrasses. And on the state level, that's one of the things that that we have to work through as a permitting process on the state and local level. When you're in the federal project, the federal government does its own permitting. So, so now we're working on the state level and have been for the last 2 years. We have 2 paths that we are working on the state level. The first was reimbursement of the $2 million, 19,000 cubic yard project that was placed on the beach in 2017. We went through the state process. It's a ranking process and has points associated with it. So we ended up at number 21 with about 35 projects that had applied for money. The state funded 20 of the projects. So they funded up to 20, which left us out at that point in time. But at the very same time, the federal disaster supplemental bill in Washington was approved where the federal government said, you know, there's been so much damage that what we're going to do is on the federal level, we're going to pay for 100% of the projects that have been impacted by various hurricanes in Florida. That takes about 5 to 7 of the projects that were in front of us. You know, we are number 21, so those who were lower ranked, or I guess higher ranked than us, would be taken out of that funding request. And this is an argument that we started, a debate we started having with the Corps and the state back in the summertime. And they were able to coordinate with the Corps and confirm for us that that is highly likely that we will be getting funding under that scenario. The problem is the feds are taking a long time to allocate their dollars. And so the people who are funded from the state level, higher ranked than us, don't want to let go of their funding yet. But Jim tells me that that funding is starting to go out, that disaster supplemental funding is starting to go out this fiscal year. So, so we are hopeful that we will, in the next 90 to 120 days, get a confirmation that we will get the 900,000. The second year, we also made application to that same state program. Tim's office, Moffitt Nickel, is the one that makes those applications for us, who does the applications. We made a request for a future sand placement. So even though we may ask for 29,000 cubic yards, we know that we are highly likely to get about 19 or 20,000 cubic yards approved, which means that, you know, we'll have this Band-Aid approach to trying to get these projects done until we get approved on the federal level. But we'll keep doing that. Now, one of the things that we did is we looked deeper into the ranking process and what the state criteria was. Very similar to the feds, they like to have public access, but they define their public access criteria as how many parking spaces you have at your public access point. Our debate with them was that the world is changing. You know, the people don't necessarily like to get in a car, drive it, and park at a beach, that there's many more modes of transportation that people are taking now, and that Key Biscayne is on the cutting edge of that with. We had the Lime bikes at the time. We were hoping that you would get scooters, but the freebie is a very, very appropriate mode to do that. And so, so that public access debate or structure is one of the things we need to keep working through. This year, the rankings came out, and we were number 22. There were more applications this year because of the damage that we've had from 3 hurricanes, I think 4 hurricanes in a 2 or 3 in a 3-year period, 4 hurricanes in a 3-year period across the state. So more jurisdictions are applying for beach renourishment. But this year, there is also a bill before the legislature. There is a bill before the legislature that changes the ranking process, and it's more focused on and puts more point emphasis on how much infrastructure you would be impacted by not putting in a beach renourishment project. So in terms of the value of revenue and economic impact to this community, that element of the new ranking process will favor Key Biscayne highly because of the value of your waterfront infrastructure and properties. The other issue is still there, which is if you are a federally approved project, you will you get an additional 15 points. And so as we move forward on the Army Corps of Engineers process, we end up getting a more favorable allocation of points if we're a federally approved project.
Forgive me for interrupting. I'm not understanding the emphasis on alternative transportation within the village of Key Biscayne, how it relates to the whole, which speaks only to parking. Access defined by a number of slots of parking and access.
So there are two elements of points in the, it's actually, I think, about 110 points 115 points that you get under the state scoring. And 2 of those are public access and whether you are a Corps approved project. When you go back to public access, they have a more definitive definition of public access, and they really, excuse me, they count the number of parking spaces that you have very near to your public access. And so we don't have parking spaces or very few parking spaces at our public access points. But what we do have is freebie and the Lime bikes and the and scooters if you eventually got scooters. Or even bicycles that people, their own personal bicycles.
Okay, so is it Joe Citizen from the city of Miami or somewhere else, because they're looking at taxpayers across, or are they just looking at citizens of Key Biscayne?
They don't define the citizen or the public.
Okay, so if the Joe Citizen from Hialeah, who comes here every weekend to either Crandon or Cape Florida, he parks in this massive parking lots that we have in either of those 2 parks. We already talked about the fact that they have access to the whole island. Would that person do what? Come and park where in Key Biscayne and then take a scooter? I don't understand.
Well, citizens of Key Biscayne are also considered members of the public. Anybody that's not a waterfront homeowner or property owner is considered. So it could be any number of your residents here that say, I want to go to the beach. I don't want to use my car. I'll get a freebie, which we have an on-demand freebie now, right? So you have an on-demand freebie that can take you to the beach at any of the 4 or 3 access points that we have here within the jurisdiction of Key Biscayne and drop you off there. And so those are the arguments that we are including in on the state level as well as the federal level.
But just to clarify, through the state program, you have what's called a secondary access and a primary access. Again, both of them are tied to parking. The primary access, you need to have restrooms there and other facilities like Crandon and like Bill Baggs. The issue is that what would give you more points is if the person from wherever in the county was coming by bus, what is the distance from the bus stop to one of these 3 or 4 public accesses? So what's unique about the village is that a person could use line. So when they got off the bus, let's say, for example, they could use line bike perhaps to get to one of the public accesses. But since you also get, I believe, county funding for the loop, I don't think you get county funding for the freebie, if I'm not mistaken. You don't?
No, just the loop right now,
Just the
right?
loop.
So in November, there was a change in the ordinance that did free up some of those restricted funds for the last mile. So
Right. So what's unique is that you actually have the loop. So one of the things you could do to improve maybe your scoring is actually to put like a trolley. What a lot of communities refer to the loop something like a trolley, so that this would just be a continuous loop, and you could actually put like little signs like a bus stop or something at one of these public accesses. And then for the state also, I think it was brought up earlier, you do get extra points for putting bike racks in the public access. And you do have bike racks in the accesses there at the end of Sonesta Drive and at the Beach Park. Well, Beach Park is not open to.
Can I ask about the loop and the B-bus? Is the expectation that you would get off even closer to the public access than where, say, the B-bus lets you off on Crandon? Like that distance is too much for walking?
It has to be within a quarter of a mile. So I believe all of the bus stops along Crandon are more than a quarter mile of any public access. So It's that last.
But if we put our freebie loop does have designated spots on Crandon Boulevard, if we made sure, is Crandon itself too far? Like if it were actually at Sonesta, example.
There's a bus stop right at Heather. I mean, Heather and Crandon, there's a bus stop, but
That's true.
apparently that's
So it's too far. Okay.
Right. So the idea is that last mile per se, which would be, so somebody could get off at the bus stop, get on the loop, and if the loop went to one of these beach access points. But then again, you have this on demand. Not only do you have the loop, you also have the on demand freebie. So when DEP was here, I was with them. We showed them the loop, we showed them the freebie, and to Colleen's point, they're kind of having to rethink some of the points and some of the scoring because as modes of transportation change.
Evolve, yeah.
I have a question back to your point that another big chunk of points that we miss out on each year is because we are not part of the federal shoreline protection program. And you alluded to if we do get in, then that bumps us up. And I've sat here long enough to know that it's in the first time that they've gone to the number just before us and we've missed out on funding. So it strikes me that that bump would really help. My question is, once, fingers crossed, once included in the federal shoreline protection program, when projects come up, are you saying that we can have the expectation if we are on the list that in addition to federal help for those projects, we could expect state dollars? Would they contribute also to those type of projects?
Tim, you want to talk about, so it's federal, state, it could be split up to 3 ways. So you get about 50% from the feds and then 25% local, if you can convince Miami-Dade to do that, and 25% local Key Biscayne.
Councilmember Moss?
I had a question that you talked about this new bill that is in the legislation. If that passes, all these point systems that we're talking about, parking spaces, would not matter anymore. Now it's about the amount of assets that could be affected by a storm, or is a combination?
It's a greater, the actual points are not allocated in the bill, but the emphasis is given to a greater value on the economic impact or the economic impact in the event of a disaster or severe erosion.
And what's the likelihood of this bill passing?
I think it's pretty high. Last year, it was, the same bill, actually similar bill, was before the legislature, and it was sponsored by somebody who ended up not in the legislature by the end of the session. And so that kind of hurt the bill's chances. And then this year, it's sponsored by Chip LaMarca out of Broward.
Okay, and then you also said that we were 22, ranked 22 this year. Out of how many? Because the other one was out of 35. How many more did it go up?
I can't remember, to be honest with you. It's in the 30s.
Okay.
In the 30s again.
So just a little bit higher than it was last time, but not
Yeah.
a huge amount.
Yeah. We talked about the disaster funding. So the challenges, as we've been talking through this, the challenges are, there's one thing I haven't talked about very much, and that is FEMA funding. So there's also a benefit to being a federally approved project with FEMA funding. After a hurricane, the process happens that a county will make application for being an impacted county from the disaster and getting a disaster declaration. Certain levels of damage bring you into something called the public assistance process, the public assistance program, where you can get money to kind of bring your beach back to where it was before the storm, which requires continuous monitoring, which you have a contract for with Moffitt Nickel to do continuous monitoring. I think that was approved in this past year, this past month, if not the month before. So, so we are not a federally approved project here, and so what we've done is through Miami-Dade County, I think after Irma, an application was made, and we are still waiting on a determination as to whether or not we will get that funding. We believe that it's been appropriated in the disaster supplemental, but we have not gotten confirmation through the chain of command that it's coming down through FEMA. FEMA's going to give it to Miami-Dade County, and then Key Biscayne will get it. So that's another element of funding that we're waiting on. For fiscal year 2019, we believe, so the first pot of funding that will likely be approved is this $900,000 from the state, which we're pushing very hard on. There is no match required for that because that's the reimbursement, and you've already appropriated the full amount, the full 2.1 million. So there's no requirement for a match for that. If the legislature approves funding for up to 60 million in this 2019-2020 process, we will, if they fund up to 60 million, then Key Biscayne will be funded. And in that case, you will need to come up with a match. So they appropriate the full amount of the project if they get enough appropriations from the legislature. And then your match is about 60-40, 55-45. It differs because there are different phases of the project. So I think they fund up to 40 million for design. I'm sorry, 40,000 for design, and you will you'll not have to match. You may have to match that depending upon what the cost for that is, what the design is, and then it's construction and then monitoring. And so each time there's a little bit of a funding match, 55-45% required. As Jim mentioned, there's no funding requirement for a match on the feasibility study, and that's a huge benefit to the community. Our challenges. So the Miami-Dade Shoreline Project renews in 2025, so that window of opportunity is now. We highly recommend that we continue this forward movement with the Corps, with the delegation, and with Miami-Dade County to be included in that feasibility study, and then finally the project. We recommend that we stay engaged in the federal feasibility study process because really Miami-Dade County is the local sponsor of that. And so it's going to be really important for us to stay engaged and know that we are being included at each step of the process. And then even when successful, sometimes local and state-funded projects are going to be required during the gap years if we're successful at the federal level. And so we continue, each year I would say that it's recommended that we continue with applications because point score will likely change due to this bill for next year. So we've got to evaluate how Key Biscayne fares in that, and then do another application under that process. And it's the consistent communication between all of these entities that is what's been able to help us break log jams when we've had them. And the council members, the mayor, members of the community have been tremendous in helping us when we find that there's a relationship, because a lot of these decisions are not only based on just the point scores that we get, but it's the relationships between the people making the decisions, the elected and appointed officials. And so those are our challenges. And so we are all here to, I think, Spencer, you were not here when we went through your slide, and Spencer had a little bit more about the local communication, which he specialized in between Durham and Miami-Dade County, and also the Corps on the federal level. So if you want to talk a little bit more about that, I'm sorry to have forgotten you.
No problem. Yeah, I guess the only thing to add in that respect is I live and work here in Miami, and I have experience as a local sponsor implementing projects of the Army Corps here in Miami-Dade County, and I think that is important in terms of being familiar with these processes and working with the county. I do a lot of work with the folks over at the county who work on beach nourishment, who work on dredging, and so I think that's an important component of this team to make sure that the county's engaged and being as effective an advocate as possible for us, because I know you all know in dealing with government entities that it's one thing to just say, yes, you support something. It's another thing to be a really strong advocate. And that's something that I think we need to do. And I think I can help do that. So, so far we've been effective in working with them. We got, obviously, as Jim said, the Mayor Lindsay to write a letter to Mayor Jimenez. Mayor Jimenez wrote a very nice letter to the Corps indicating that they, as the local sponsor, wanted Key Biscayne included in this study, and that we just need to keep that up. I think it's very important that we not look at this as something that's a done deal. It's something we're going to have to work at hard over the next year and a half to make sure that we're put in the best light possible going forward. Just to sort of wrap up, when you look back at the beaches in Miami Beach during the 50s, let's say, and you see those pictures, and I've mentioned this before when I've been here, I mean, those pictures show the ocean all the way up to the hotels, and there were seawalls and jetties built to protect those structures back when the ocean was in a much different place than it is today. Through the federal government's participation with those beaches, you have basically all of the activity and economic development that's happened over there for the past 50 years. Had that not been the case, none of that ever would have taken place. And so, of course, that beach is very different than Key Biscayne. I'm not saying that that's going to transform Key Biscayne into something it's not, but the level of shore protection that this project will bring to the key, I think, is difficult to underestimate. I mean, it's critical to get a big, strong project here that will help prevent us from having to go back and do these small Band-Aid projects every 2-3 years. You know, what I think this team would like to see is some form of an artificial reef, let's say, that's going to help provide some protection from the wave attenuation that's focused on the middle of the island. And that, in conjunction with a couple 100,000 cubic yard nourishment, maybe 400,000, you know, back in 1980s, I think you had a 487,000 cubic yard project. What we're trying to do is put the key in a position to work on this once every 10 years, let's say, instead of once every 2 years. And I think that's what we're all hoping to gain out of this, and to make sure that we're bringing other funding partners to the table, because right now you guys are stuck dealing with this on your own, and we just don't think that's right. We think we need partners to help the key get to where the key needs to be, and that's really everything that's behind what we're trying to achieve here. So
I think you really answered my question, because hearing 19,000 cubic yards, and we need the big project. We need to do long-term solutions. You know, I was up Barrier Island that I grew up on, up in New York. After Sandy, just everything got wiped. And the past year, they've done enormous. The Army Corps was up there just pumping it. I mean, from a mile off, they're pumping it onto the beach, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm sitting on the beach watching the sand just erupt literally out of the pipes to fill in the beaches. And I'm thinking, why can't we do something? Because in 2002, I think we pumped it in from the reservoirs. I guess that was my subsequent question: is what is the possibility of us being able to use those reservoirs? Sorry, Pete. To get the sand up to our beaches. I mean, is that a possibility, or are we stuck with trucking?
Well, I mean, the sand sourcing is going to be an issue going forward. I mean, luckily we have the federal government doing a very intensive study right now to determine where, whether this project is reauthorized, and if so, where the sediment's going to come from. The most recent study on availability of sediment is looking at offshore sources in Martin and St. Lucie County, or not in Martin and St. Lucie, but offshore of those counties. And so that's been determined to have sufficient quantities of sediment to meet the rest of this project here through 2025. Now, there's a little bit of, political uncertainty with respect to getting that material and bringing it somewhere else. But we're going to study that. We're going to get into it. But I think the point is, everybody has the same problem of finding the right sand source, right? And so it's either going to be the key on its own or the key with the county and the federal government. And we think it's better to be with them than not. So,
agreed.
Yeah.
Okay.
But just to clarify, Mayor, you're correct. The bar areas that were used both for the 87 project and for the 2002 project are right in here. They're about 5,000 feet off the beach. There's about 50 years worth of sand there. What's happened over the years is that some seagrass has recruited in that area, so there would be some impacts.
Mitigation.
That it might require mitigation or to be addressed. But part of what this team is doing is trying to educate the Corps of Engineers in these types of opportunities. And like Spencer was saying, Miami-Dade County and even to some extent Broward County is experiencing issues. I mean, they probably need, it's like over 10 million cubic yards of sand, maybe even 20 million cubic yards of sand over the next 30 to 40 years, and there's been no sand source. I mean, they've said, well, there might be some sand in St. Lucie County and things like that, but that continues to be a challenge for. I mean, right now, Broward County is doing a large truck haul project. There's a large truck haul, 100,000 cubic yards, that started now in Surfside. That's being done by the Corps of Engineers. So more and more in Broward and Dade counties, you're seeing truck haul projects. But yes, there is quite a bit of sand reserve that's left in these bar areas, and it's good material.
Thanks. Vice Mayor.
So if I can just make sure that I have And you guys were amazing this afternoon to sit with me, but I want to make sure that I can restate everything that I've learned. So basically, the three big things that we're working on right now is, one, reimbursement for our last truck haul of $900,000. Feels good, but we don't believe it till the money is in the bank. Next is another short-term Band-Aid type project of similar size, using the same permits we already have, just to kind of keep us alive while we're fighting our way in or schmoozing our way into the federal program, which will finally be able to do the kind of large-scale project that we feel that really best suits our community and protects us, really. And once included in the program, we then have funding sources from the federal government and the state likely to help us, assist us with that. And from what I heard tonight is that we are ahead of what you had thought where we would be in terms of that project 3, the big project, and the federal shoreline protection program, which is great. So my question to you is, since you've already sped us up, when do you think we would be looking, assuming we get included, for a project of that size? About how far out in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, in the mid-2020s, I would say.
Okay.
To get a project like that.
So then we're probably looking at more than one trucked in Band-Aid.
Right. And another important point to mention, and I'm not sure if they mentioned it before I got here, but the village has a joint coastal permit issued by FDEP, and that's a permit that's good for 10 years, which will allow these smaller nourishment projects to proceed. I mean, there's still assessment and monitoring and other types of things that have to go into it, but that permit is expiring in 2020. Now, Tim has worked with DEP and gotten them to extend the deadline of that permit based on some legislative extensions that have been made available for emergency declarations. And so I think we have bought another year, 18 months, something like that. But about this time next year, we're going to have to reapply for that to make sure that we're covered from, let's say this time next year into, I'd want to be covered through 2025. I mean, there's a very definite time frame that we can provide to you all that shows what happens after the chief's report is issued. That's really the termination of the feasibility study. But basically, once that's done, you have to go to Congress and get your project authorized. So they would have to reauthorize the Miami-Dade County project, including Key Biscayne. That's something only Congress can do, right? So you got to go through the whole process up there. Then once you're authorized, they have to appropriate the funding. And so that's why I say even after the 3 years, there's still some work that has to be done.
Okay. So we're looking at a minimum of 2 Band-Aid projects. One, we're likely all on our own, and the other, maybe we're in the program and we get bumped up a little bit on the state list, that maybe we could get a little help for the second one. But really, we've got 2 more. All goes the best it could go. We have a minimum of 2 more of those before we could commence.
I think a minimum of 2, I would say.
Probably 3.
And you have also a small emergency, FEMA emergency application, which I don't know if you have a design for that, or if they've approved an amount of cubic yardage on that.
So as Colleen mentioned, there is a pending application the village has for FEMA funding. It's about a 20,000 yard. The FEMA will only reimburse for the amount of sand that was actually eroded as part of the event. So that project would be 75% funded by FEMA. There was a note from Juan, your HR director, that's been handling some of the FEMA coordination here on behalf of the village. Just I think 1 or 2 months into the job, he was all of a sudden he's done a fantastic job learning FEMA and keeping us all up to speed on the reimbursements. But we do have to actually extend that FEMA deadline. But as Colleen mentioned earlier, it's kind of just going through the processes. We're fairly confident that you're going to get that FEMA reimbursement for Hurricane
From Hurricane Irma that washed away the sand we had just put down.
That would be 75% funding. I don't think anybody's gotten confirmation. There is talk of the state giving 12.5% so that the village would only have to contribute 12.5%. But I believe all the budget information we've provided to the village has assumed that you'd be providing the 25% cost, local cost share.
Okay.
So if there's another storm for these during the time period before the federal project, came on board, then some of the FEMA funding, again, if the county was declared a disaster area, there might be, but unfortunately, the FEMA funding only comes with a disaster declaration, so that's not such a good thing. We really don't want hurricanes, period. So.
Right.
Brett.
Oh, thank you for the recap. That was very helpful for me. I understand the state side, the Band-Aids, the repairs that we need to do, the FEMA. What I want to understand a little bit more is the federal, the Army Corps of Engineers side, and what I understood is that there's an opening permit from 2025 to 2075. It's a 50-year area that's opening up. And when this project is done, are they looking at a project for the next 50 years and how it's going to keep being re-implemented?
Yes.
Is that all designed from
Yes.
the beginning? We know exactly what's coming to us on what year it's going to be here. And what you guys are trying to do is get us in there once every 10 years, a large project. And the gap years, I guess, is in between. If we get hit with a storm or something in between there, we can use the state funding, FEMA, different things to help us in between that area. But other than that, we are looking at hopefully once every 10 years, a large project coming, and maybe some out-of-the-box ideas. That's correct,
Well,
right?
in addition to what you said, and you actually nailed it pretty well there, if there is a hurricane and you're an authorized project, you can tap into money directly from the Corps. The Corps first does an assessment of damages after a hurricane outside of FEMA. So they come down and look at the coast, say, oh, there's what the damages are. The money comes directly from the Corps to authorized projects. So if you're authorized, you don't have to worry about FEMA as much as just get it directly from the Corps. That's another benefit we didn't talk about.
Excellent.
But the thing you mentioned, which is, to me, the best benefit, is you have a long-term commitment from a federal partner, and it's usually scheduled to some degree. They know that over the course of 50 years, there's going to be several renourishments, and they usually kind of calculate how many years they need to come back and do it, because they have an idea. But if there's storms in between, they can change that schedule as needed. So you've got a long-term commitment, and that's the best part.
Are we prepared that, we get something, but maybe it's not exactly what we were hoping for? It wasn't as the size of project we wanted or how often it's going to happen. And how do we deal with that if we're in that position?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would hope
That's part of what we're working on with the feasibility study, the first step is really making sure that they're comfortable keeping us in the project, given these public access issues and some of the economic damage assessment issues that they need to make. And then, once we overcome that hurdle, we're looking at, all right, what exactly is our project? And that's really where, Tim's expertise and history with the project is going to come in handy, because he can talk to, the unique bathymetry here that, we think warrants some kind of breakwater artificial reef system and the type of project and where it would go. So.
And on during this project, is it 100% funded from them, or there's money that will be coming from us on any of these projects?
The feasibility study is a $3 million study that typically is cost shared with the local sponsor, 50-50, but because it came in the supplemental, they're funding the whole thing.
But what about
you're talking about construction?
Yeah, the actual.
It's usually 65-35. 65 federal, 35 local sponsor.
So we would have to be put 35% into that.
But when you say it's
the
probably going to be
local sponsor,
county.
which means
Could be county, state would be part of
I
it
know
as
in
well.
Duval County, because I worked on that project, that 35% came from the state of Florida, the city of Jacksonville Beach, and also I think Duval County split the 35%. I don't remember what configuration. So
and actually, Key Biscayne may not have to put any money because it'll be coming from the county. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
It's possible. I'm not
Probably not likely, but I would,
You can
our,
believe that
our,
one
our
today.
hope is that we get as many other people into that 35 as possible to help you guys with your share,
Councilmember Cigarella?
I understand the strategy and the game plan in this, but is there anything here for a more long-term solution besides just dumping sand on the beach, or is that outside the scope of this process?
No, there's absolutely solutions that need to be looked at in addition to sand. That's what we talk about, the artificial reefs or breakwaters.
Is the Army Corps of Engineer doing anything with regard to government cut? Are they looking at that or even considering to look at that?
Well,
Guessing the answer is no.
we think they're going to look at the original impact of government cut to these beaches to the south as part of this study. That's what they said they were going to do, and originally when they were included as part of the justification was because of that original project.
But no consideration.
We need to keep on them and make sure that that continues to be part of this.
But consideration of modifications to government cut is not part of the plan.
No, I don't think so. I mean, traditionally what you see in these kind of situations, like let's take Bal Harbor for example, and Haulover Inlet. So in most beaches on Florida, the longshore drift is from north to south. So the sand is flowing from north to south. When they created Haulover Inlet, basically it stopped the flow of sand from north to south. And you have a great big buildup of sand on Haulover Beach Haulover Beach Park. And then at Bal Harbor, you have a sand-starved beach. So the typical type of modification you see is an active dredging operation that would take sand from that area north of the inlet and move it to the south, or some kind of pump station or other types of modifications like that. I mean, we're not. I don't know. Tim maybe could speak to that, in more detail, but I don't think that's something that's being considered at this point.
That's
Like taking the sand from South Point and bypassing it over the inlet, something like that. It's, I mean, I don't know.
If you, this is the most recent sediment budget. When you start looking at littoral processes, it's basically a conservation of mass. What comes in has to come out. So if you look at this figure, this is from the sediment budget that was done in 1995. This is the most recent sediment budget here for government cut. It shows all of this sand being lost to the system, essentially a river of sand. So what we need to what this team needs to re-educate that this sand is being lost to the system, and that's what should be renourished on Key Biscayne and sand to the south. So it's part of a process, just getting them to understand that this if government cut was not there, this sand would eventually make its way to Fisher Island, Virginia Key, and onto Key Biscayne like it did historically before 1900. So a lot of this data, we've been feeding a lot of this data to the Corps of Engineers. This team has to help educate them that what sand is actually being lost to this system.
Okay. Councilmember Loretti?
No, I just wondered, councilman here who just got a big award and everything else, since you have public here.
Let's hold off on that until.
No, I'm talking about the public, because I see a lot of.
We're gonna have them speak.
I know, but people are drifting out.
Well, I understood, but I'm trying to allow Councilmember Moss had one more question. I was gonna open it up to public comments after that.
I just want to rephrase the question that I asked before. If the project over the next 50 years is not exactly what we want, are we allowed to make adjustments to add on to what they're doing with, or is it their way or the highway, and you're rigidly stuck for the next 50 years in what they proposed?
Were you going to say something? Because I'm
Right. Not necessarily. So, for example, the Miami-Dade County, the county has implemented projects, their own projects within the Federal Shore Protection Project. So you're not limited. There have been coastal structure projects that have been done within. Obviously, there's coordination, but they've done their own beach nourishment projects in conjunction or without the federal government. But generally, it has to kind of be in a system. For example. Perhaps, I mean, this was the feasibility study that we did a couple of years ago. Let me just show you at the breakwaters here. Let's see, here we are. We looked at some submerged breakwaters as an option on behalf of the village here. Just as Spencer was mentioning, these can be artificial reefs or breakwaters, which would actually slow down and further stabilize the beach again, getting to that 10-year, instead of doing this every 2 or 3 years, might look at a 10 or a 15-year type design. So what could happen is, for example, the Corps of Engineers, as part of the Federal Shore Protection Project, might do the large-scale beach nourishment, which would involve a lot of impacts to offshore seagrass. But then the village might be able to, on their own, as part of this project, design and permit the coastal structures. So it is possible. It's not done very often, but it is possible to implement, as long as it's a systemized, coordinated approach for beach management.
Thank you.
You touched on one other thing that I just wanted to underscore and make sure I understand correctly, and for those council members that are new and maybe members of the public who haven't had the pleasure of hearing you guys in the past, one of the other benefits, as I understand it, of being a part of this federal program is that they have a little more muscle in terms of what they can do versus what we can do. The issues with the seagrass encroachment that really impede us when we do our Band-Aids, that every time our beach recedes, the seagrass marches in, and then we can only refill less and less each time. But the Army Corps of Engineers somehow, I don't even want to know how, has the ability to really go out further.
Right, so just to make a point to that, you're right. And it's really a degree of when they look at the impact. So they're going to look at the impact as part of their NEPA review. And if they determine that a certain project is warranted, they'll take a large-scale look at the impacts and then really propose to mitigate those impacts in a large-scale way. So it's not that whatever impacts we have are going to be dealt with and mitigated in a proper way, but it's going to be done on a bigger scale that allows us to do a bigger project in a bigger scale than we could achieve as a village by ourselves. So, yeah, just want to make that.
Plus, they help pay for it.
Yes, of course. Yes.
I'm going to open this up to public comments. Councilmember Fine, I know you're getting ready to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alan Fine, 525 Allendale. Forgive me, I came straight from the airport, and but this project has always been near and dear to me, and a lot of you covered some of the points I wanted to make. One of the last points that was made had to do with the damage that was done by government cut, which in my mind, it's really the cause of our problem. Back in the day before any of us were here, the beach was wide and beautiful, and it's not sea level rise that's done it. It's been the redirection of sand from as a result of government cut. And as a longtime litigator, I've said to many of you, at some point maybe we need to sue the federal government. And I understand that we've chosen to go in a more peaceful fashion, and I'm very hopeful that that works out. But it really is a problem caused by the federal government. As Ronald Reagan used to say, I'm your federal government, what can I do for you? This is what they've done for us, and it needs to, never thought I'd be quoting Ronald Reagan. But it needs to be addressed sooner or later, and hopefully it'll be a lot before 2025. The other question I had that was just kind of touched on is I was always wondering whether a jetty at the southern part of Key Biscayne would have the same impact that the jetty coming out of government cut does, which seems to trap sand that could be used to be put back on the beach. That seems similar to what one of you guys were just talking about. You're
talking at the end of the towers, or are you talking at the end at Cape Florida?
As a layman, I don't know where the right spot for it would be, but something to catch the north to south flow of sand, right, so that it doesn't just go out towards to our south where they don't need more sand. But that seemed to be what you guys were starting to address.
Well, to actually put, what you're referencing is called a jetty. So we could, or jetty or a groin type field. So you can just, so what you're referencing is a structure that's perpendicular, that would actually trap the sand. So I can almost tell you it would never get permitted because that would really interrupt kind of the natural, coastal processes.
Like they did to us.
Correct, yes. So there's a lot of precedent growing field type projects. I mean, some in certain applications, some growing fields have been permitted. What we've proposed here, and again, this was just a feasibility study, are very small submerged breakwaters. You'd only be able to see the top at really low tide. They'd be very, we don't want to, we made a presentation on this last year, but the village wanted not to feel like you're in an armored beach around rocks and things. So what this would do is it would just kind of slow down and kind of dissipate some of the wave energy to further stabilize the beach and not if you put a structure at the end here, you would really see it would really make a difference, and then it might cause erosion in bill bags. Right. So you can't, when you put a structure out, you can't make the erosion worse updrift or downdrift.
No, I mean south of Bill Bags, where would be the end of our island.
There is a jetty right off the lighthouse.
If you could extend that, would that help?
We could look at it, but yeah.
Let me, so I don't know if we have a graphic somewhere that I'll try to find, but another way to say it is that, well, just looking at this, for example, so, well, this is not really good. I'm sorry, I'm going to try to find this, and if I can, I'll do my best to explain it. But there's two types of structures. This is exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, so you see these arrows right here, and the relative magnitude of the arrows indicate the relative magnitude of the strength of the current. And really the shore, the wave energy comes in and it's focused in this point on Key Biscayne, right? And so what happens in a manner that's very unique to Key Biscayne is that focal wave energy then goes north and goes south. And that's a big problem, a big part of the erosion problem here in the center beach. So there's two ways to deal with this. One is you can do, as you're suggesting, which is to put a shore parallel structure to shore perpendicular structure to catch the sand that goes up and goes down. The other thing you can do is what Tim was just referencing, which is to put in a shore parallel structure. And the shore parallel structure will dissipate the wave energy that's going towards the key. And so what happens when you put in those offshore breakwaters is these red arrows, they're still there, but they're a lot smaller. And so that's really what we're trying to do. We think it's a better solution because, well, for two different reasons. One is these breakwaters can act as artificial reefs and attract marine life, which is something that's great and we all like. And in dissipating that wave energy, you really eliminate a lot of the sand transport problem, right? If we put in a shore perpendicular structure like a jetty down here, all the sand is going to pile up and then we got to move it back at some point, and it doesn't really take care of the focal wave energy and that current going up and down. So that's the idea. I mean, in a nutshell, that's really what Tim is going to be studying. So
my last question is, if you could go back to that picture.
Sure.
Is this sand piling up here? Is that kind of natural shallow water that some days goes a half a mile out into the ocean? Is that
What's that in front of Commodore?
pile up or not?
Key Colony?
yeah, I mean,
That's the stuff we trucked in.
Well, that's actually, that's right in front of Key Colony and Crandon. That goes out, you can walk out quite a ways there.
Commodore, yeah.
yeah, I mean, right. So when I go to the beach with my family, I go to that north beach by the Stoneman Douglas Nature Center. And I mean, at low tide, there are big bars that you can walk out
Oh, yeah.
really
So
far.
Does that continue to get deep
I don't know if that's accumulated. I mean, it's clear that sand is moving north up into that direction. And they have a nice, big, healthy beach up at Crandon and a pretty nice, healthy beach down at Billback. So, I mean, we really think that, handling this wave energy here and the resulting south and north flow is not all of the solution, but is part of the solution we've got to address. We think we get a nice nourishment project with some structure to help dissipate that wave energy, we're going to be in much better shape than we are right now.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Sure, thank you.
Can I
Anybody
ask-
else? Fred, did you want to ask a
But
question?
I wanted to,
Yes, Mayor?
I just had a follow-up question about the idea
well,
of
don't go away, Mr.
affecting that
Councilman.
wave energy. So we have some water quality concerns, and is slowing that down going to affect like the flushing out and water changing?
That's something that Tim is going to have to study and figure out. I mean, they know how to do, these coastal engineers know how to do flushing analysis and make sure that, whatever is there isn't going to contain that too much. But understood, and we know that's an issue.
Thank you.
Anybody else, the public want to speak? Bob? Come on up.
It's Bob Raymond, 791 Crandon. A few sailors in the room, and they're very cognizant of wind direction. And if you walk out the breakwater that's protecting the lighthouse with a piece of yarn and a stick, invariably the prevailing wind direction is right at the carved out middle of our beach. And if you look at the sand along the beach, even tiny little riblets on the water get that sand. It's very, very low density. That sand comes right up in suspension real quickly. And I'm convinced that most of the sand up on our end of the beach quickly made its way down to the lower condos. And I wouldn't think there'd be any reservations in needing special permitting to bring it back. If the town had a barge and could suck some of it up and sprinkle it back. We had a lecture from the experts at the University of Miami about permitting and potential damage to seagrass, and we're told by the experts that if you disperse that as a snowplow would on an icy road from the back of a barge, if you sprinkle sand on seagrass, it's not hurt at all. It's used to that from every storm. And those experts are recommending we do that on a regular basis instead of trucking it across town, or look for denser sand that's going to stay in place better. I also wanted to comment about the definition of public. I own a home in the Federal National Seashore in Cape Cod, and they want visitors to use the beach. And the deal we worked out to keep from condemnation, every 5 years, we have to certify how many people have rented the homes in that National Seashore. And they're very influenced that. People that go to the hotel, people that rent condos, we have of 111 units, we have hardly any people that in our condominium that are there full time. We have 70 to 75% of the people at any given time are from distant places, and they come to Key Biscayne and spend money. They have parking spaces, 2 of them in the garage, and they enjoy the beaches every day. And they're part of the public. The people I rent to in Cape Cod are part of the public. To be a day hopper that doesn't mean you're the only public. We have a lot of public people here besides homeowners, and maybe if we pointed out to the authorities how many people visit Key Biscayne, renting and spending the night in a hotel, maybe that would be of influence. Thank you.
No, isn't that amazing, the enormous amount of free consultants we have here?
It was a great suggestion.
I mean, I'm telling you, I'm not joking. I'm not joking. That is a brilliant idea. Between seasonal rentals and the very large hotel, that should be clearly an accountable number for the presentations you do moving forward. I would have never thought of it. Thank you. That
It is actually one of the elements that is on the state level it's the, transient, they call it transient rentals. So
Well, I
whether
don't
it's
know,
a
but I didn't hear
hotel-
in the presentation what I'm saying. I'm glad for this gentleman to have brought it
Yes.
to my attention as an elected official. Look, I wanted to make sure, this also dovetails into, hopefully, what we are empowered to do is to set policy and recommendation for staff, and hopefully we can articulate some talking points as we move forward. I think that is one idea. The other one is, which I think and I felt that had some bounds at that massive meeting with all the engineers from all over in the county, that we are part of 1/3 of 2/3 that are public, 100% public access, the two parks. I mean, we have to stay on message is what I'm trying to say. And, it'll be for us to decide now that's how I view it from a non-technical point of view, that we need to move forward, because I think the engagement that you recommend needs to be enhanced to all 7 of us as well, because I trust me, I've worked in Washington, and I know you develop a talent to know, I don't want to call it a form letter, but to get a letter versus a call from a lot of people here. And so I think one of the things I hope we can accomplish today is to try to give you all, through our delegated authority to our manager, that we move in that direction. And I would always say to my fellow councilmen that I found the people from the Corps of Engineer. I spent several hours there. They were wonderful people, technical people. They have their, and they're not that far. They're in Jacksonville. And I find also in my Washington experience that you can know the president, but it's a lot better to know the staff.
Yeah.
It's a lot better to know the staff. And those people in Jacksonville are the people who are going to be making those decisions. And by the way, they're probably very impressed of our security, because I'm sure that we.
Well,
Don't,
No,
let's
that's okay.
not even revisit
Forget it.
that
Scratch it from the record.
Let's move on.
May I
But
just follow
anyway,
up
I think
on something
no,
you said?
absolutely.
So I'm flying back tomorrow morning at 6:45. And anybody wants to join me, you can come. But you make a good point. I think I've spoke to Andrea about it as well, and Mr. Mayor. I think a couple of you do need to come to Washington and talk to Congresswoman Shalala and the others from Dade County, and we should go talk to headquarters. And these are the meetings I typically set up for my clients, and we could do that in short order. And you bring your talking points with you and all of our letters, and just so they know that you're engaged.
Right.
Because if they don't know that you're engaged, they hear from me. But when they hear from you, it's a little different. They like to see that the mayor came up and made his point, and this is important to the village. So
Absolutely.
it's
Happy
something
to
we
do
need to do.
Yeah, by the way, I didn't mean to say that the form letters are not important. I think they need to be followed up for a face.
No, they're very important. They're the record.
Out of sight, out of mind.
You're absolutely right.
In Washington.
Vice Mayor,
Thank you.
McCormick?
Colleen, I had forgotten that you guys were including that data. I just wanted to follow up, and I guess this maybe is more of a question to the manager, but I know you feel like you've gotten all of that data that you need, like in terms of how many short-term rentals we have, because we, as a village, we regulate it in the private homes, but the individual condominium buildings each have their own policies, and like, I imagine that you collect information on who's staying, because you have to give it to the security guard and things like that, that it strikes me that each condo president would be very happy to help so that we can restore the beach, and perhaps we could help facilitate getting that information for you, because Botanica comes to mind, that they have a section that has even nightly rentals. I mean, that's a lot of people coming and enjoying the beach.
So we do not have data at that level, and I think that would be helpful.
And then also
And so
comes
if
to
we could
mind
work with
Coral
staff,
Reef,
Andrea, to,
Coral Reef Apartments and the Beach House as well.
So the Airbnb, I mean, there's.
I mean, we collect the Airbnb, VRBO, whatever, for private homes through code enforcement, but the condominium buildings each regulate themselves.
And there was another guideline maybe that we can, when we went up to Tallahassee, remember how they looked at linear feet of value? And I said, but you're missing the point. You could have 100 feet of beach, but you can have $1 billion worth of real estate. So a linear foot instrument doesn't really reflect the value of the assets that are being protected and or serviced. So that was something that we were looking at, trying to help the administrative guidelines more accurately reflect the benefit derived.
Just to clarify, Vice Mayor, the main criteria in terms of counting for the what's called a lodging establishment is the type of license. So in the applications, we help the village compile like hotels and things like that. Obviously you have the Ritz-Carlton and the Silver Sands. There's only one or two other establishments. There was one in Key Colony. Is that the Botanica, I think? So that one is counted because whatever that association is has the state license as a lodging establishment. If a condo is just renting out units, Airbnb or something like that, while there might be a lot of rentals, unless the entity is licensed as a lodging establishment. I don't remember the Florida statutes.
Well, and I think we require something like that now with the private homes, right? Don't they have to get some kind of license from the village?
We issue a business tax receipt to the single-family homes that participate in the Airbnbs, but I believe this is a state, the lodging establishment is a state license. I don't think it's
So there's
ours.
only, to our knowledge, and I think there's one, maybe it's on Enid or something, there's one other that has.
Beach House.
Maybe that's it, a very, very small one, and it's pretty far away from the beach. So it's really, that's the Botanica, which is 20 or 30 units. It's not a lot. Obviously, the Ritz, Silver Sands, it's not a lot. Now, I think in that meeting, you're right, the manager was with us. You know, they're kind of looking at Airbnb, again, just based on the modes of transportation and things. Airbnb is, I mean, in some cases, they do more business than a hotel does. So
The law hasn't caught up.
Right. So they're looking at that. I don't know that there's been any legislation that's been proposed to evaluate that.
Okay.
Robert?
While Robert comes up, but I would like for you to change the conversation. Change the conversation with them, irrespective of what you just said, which you codify, that there is, in fact, there's a pattern of high rentals here because there are people here who live only 4 or 5 months a year. I know it doesn't fit in the little check, but, you know, we have the informal communications, and I think you need to make them aware, as the gentleman previously stated. I think it's a valuable input.
Robert?
Good evening. Robert Dusoglu, 785 Glenridge Road. First and foremost, I commend the council. This is the best investment that we could have, is to be doing this work, and it's crucial for our community. It's crucial for our businesses, for everything. And I feel completely different where we were 2 or 3 years ago as compared to now, to have this information and to know the fact that we are pursuing these very important work. Councilmember Moss and I actually went to visit Representative Ross Laitman and also Marco Rubio in order to discuss the beaches. So we have been pursuing that, and we did talk to a contractor that had done a $30 million restoration in Long Island, and he had discussed having a submerged reef, but more of a sandbox where it would collect the sand rather than let it go back and beyond. But I think that Councilmember McCormick made a very valid point that we have a crucial matter regarding the cleanliness of our water now, and we need that flow. So I'm not sure that a solid wall, but perhaps artificial reef of some sort would be more appropriate. Besides that, about a year ago, we had talked about, and Jake, you were at the presentation, a company which actually has the technology to change the granule aspect and the hydraulics of the sand. It's called Shorelock was the name of the company. So that's something that would change the dynamics as to what he was talking about, that the way that the sand is taken out. So you may take a look at that. Shorelock is the name of the company. All right, so that was just my comments. And again, I commend the council for doing this work. This is, I think it's the most important project that we have at this particular moment. Without our beaches, without our water, you know, this is just not the same place. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Anybody else want to speak? All right, well, thanks very much for all of this. I think we've got a lot to be thinking about. I appreciate all your efforts. I'm sorry. Francois?
Last question.
Shoot.
I'm concerned about
Coming
No,
up.
you got to come to the mic. You don't get to hide in the back.
Oswald Drive, 799 Crandon Boulevard. We're trying to protect our beaches, and that's number one. But the water problem, the water contamination, so if we have beautiful beaches and we can't go in the water, I think that should go hand to hand, hand on hand. And I haven't heard anything about the water contamination, and I think that should be included in this project.
Well, that's not really them. I understand what
But
you're
for
saying,
us
but
to
you're
maybe-
right. It's an issue that we have to deal with, and we're working, trying to work with the county and the
Because
state.
what's a
And
beach if we
we're
can't go
trying
on
to
the
do
water,
things.
in
You're
the
right.
water? Thank you.
Thank you.
But it is something we are working
No,
on.
we are. That's what I just said. We're working on it. It's not that we're not working. It's just not. That's not their.
But it's they go hand to hand.
Agreed. Agreed. Pat. This is 2 times in like 3 weeks. This is pretty wild.
It's improving. Good evening, 361 Beechwood Drive. Thank you for all the things you do. Thank you for giving the time. This is one of the very important issues that we have in Key Biscayne. I remember the first time they did the beach, that it was through not trucks, but it came from the middle of the ocean, and it was done so quickly. I understand there are some issues with the environment, but probably it will be the best way to do it. But thank you anyway, and thank you for all the consultants, because it really was a great presentation.
Thank you, Pat.
Just want to ask a quick question. To address the water quality, and I think that a couple of people may have mentioned it, the artificial barriers that we're putting out there, if they can turn into living reefs, would that be something, one, that could help, with contamination in any way? And then the other question I wanted to ask, I wasn't 100% sure on, dune restoration, would that be part of these projects where they would actually be looking at the dunes as well? Or is that something that maybe we would have to add on to these projects that might be coming up?
Okay, so we'll address the water quality issue. As Spencer mentioned, the shore parallel structures that, again, presented in the feasibility study, which would be just trapezoidal shape. This is a cross-section view. These are the plan view of where the structures would be. This would actually slow down the amount of wave-induced currents. So it would not flush as much as it is just open exposure now. So as Spencer mentioned, if this feasibility, if this project moves forward, that's something, the effects on the water quality would have to be carefully reviewed. These structures can be modified to be more porous. It's a delicate balance to allow enough wave energy to maintain. I mean, you can put a wall out there, but then there just wouldn't be enough wave energy to maintain a beach. So the idea is that these would just dissipate some of the wave energy, but it would slow down some of the currents.
But could these structures turn into actual reefs that are living at some point, where they become, home to all types of fish and things like that? And would that be able to flush out any type of contaminants before it even enters towards the coast by any chance?
Well, yes.
We don't know where the source of contamination is.
Okay, but it could become a living thing and not just a
Certainly.
structure out there, right?
No, conceptually what's proposed are limestone boulders. So the minute you put limestone boulders out there, they immediately begin to recruit essentially a reef. So over time, in 5 to 10 years, these would be great snorkeling reefs.
Yeah.
Whether they would improve water quality to some of the concerns the village has now, it's hard for us to answer that at this point.
But I think it's safe to say that if they're recruiting sponges and bivalves, organisms that naturally filter water as their means of survival, that's a welcome addition, certainly, to the issues that we're facing. And I think Mayor Davey is right. I mean, nobody really knows the sources and the causes of these, hits that we're getting. And so I think it's certainly something that we're cognizant of, and water quality, I think, is high on all of our lists in terms of something that we need to be monitoring. And we're not going to be able to do a project that's going to worsen water quality here. It's going to have to be better or as good as it is now. So it's certainly something very important to us.
Thank you very much.
Was there a
And
second half to
the
the
other one
question?
was the dune. So when we're doing beach nourishment projects from the federal money, would we be looking at including the dune, or typically they do, or is that something maybe we would have to do ourselves on top?
No, the dune would be part of the project. It's part of your shore protection project. You know, these are the cross sections from the 2002 project, and you can actually see how the dunes were enhanced here. You can see it right here. So the dunes were built up pretty well. So the dune is a very active part of the system. The village has been proactive in maintaining the native species there. The dunes have actually done very well here for shore protection.
To clarify, you mean the seaward of the ECL, though, right? So like the area that's private property, there are some areas that are private. You wouldn't be building that dune area up.
Correct.
Okay.
How far is the coastal construction line?
Erosion control line.
Oh, it's the erosion control line. Okay.
The ECL, and it varies throughout the village, kind of, but it goes pretty far up in some areas, and then it comes back down.
Okay, excellent.
So the dunes were really enhanced in the 2002 project, and the village has done a good job. There's actually been dune-specific projects. One was done, I think, in 2008, but there's been your dune management consultants done a really good job in keeping the native species there and enhancing that shore protection value.
Right.
May I have a question? Yeah. On the issue of outreaching, I'm very concerned on focusing on our messaging moving forward. Have you reached out, or can you reach out to the director of the Cape Florida Billbags Park as a possible ally, someone who has some experience and also is part of our neighborhood?
It's something that's important, and I know Art, and I should
Yes,
reach out
I
to him and
recommend
talk
it
to
very
him.
highly.
Yeah. I'm a former member of the Friends of Cape Florida Park and helped with their seawall reconstruction project in No Name Harbor, and was really wanted to make sure that project got done. And so I will reach out to him, yes.
Thank you.
Sure
I think that's a big.
Great idea.
The second point, to make sure we're on message, and I'm sorry that our former councilman had to leave. He had his basketball shirt on. I don't believe in historical guilt, so I want to make sure that unless I misunderstood you technically, we get off the blame the Corps of Engineer for doing government cut and the always thing and litigation messaging. I don't think it's going to get us anywhere. I'm not into.
They said that that's helping us get in, though. Their acknowledgement of their, different from litigation. I agree with you.
It's a fine line. Yeah.
2 points. I agree with you
My point is, until they have computers running government, they're usually human beings, and those human beings who I find to be very wonderful that I met recently should not have any historical burden for whatever mistakes were made in the past. It's just how you say things, and sometimes we get a little bit, a little too arrogant with ourselves. And particularly if anything that they're going to be doing that to improve what is a lifeline of the economy of Miami-Dade County is not aggravating a thing, then I think that's the kind of a message that we need to make sure that the glass is half full and not half empty. Since all of you are doing the exchange, and Madam Manager, you're the one, I hope for at least one councilman, that's what I would recommend.
That's an excellent point.
By the way, moving this forward ahead of schedule had a lot to do with goodwill that this council has developed. And I don't know if you, since he's a strong mayor, has written a letter to the mayor of Miami-Dade County, Mayor Jimenez, for writing that nice letter, which will help us get it on. And I think that's important to be able to say thank you to people who help us. So that's number two. The other thing that intrigues me, and perhaps you can look at, is this precedent that you talked about the city of Miami got from the Corps of Engineer one time only on Virginia Key. Is there any lessons there that we can apply? Again, I don't need an answer now, but I think you mentioned it.
Certainly we have those studies and are looking at them and the precedential effect that they have, and we're trying to, again, use it in a way that results in a continuous partnership and not a one-time.
Right, not a one-off.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I already think that the other councilmen are already better up, but I think that the idea, since we do have to articulate to our bosses, the taxpayers, that this is all being looked at strategically The people had enough of the Band-Aid. And I think that Madam Manager only gives me my last word is this incredible need we have for you to look to hire somebody on communications. So that people who are not here because they have other commitments or not watching knows that all that everybody's doing and the previous council have been doing. We sometimes are short ourselves on communicating the wonderful work you're doing and the wonderful work that all the council. So I would urge you, again, to figure out a way to get somebody technically competent to do our own communication things. And just lastly, I think you guys did a great job. I learned a lot. I have a very high learning curve, and I'm available anytime you need me to help. And thank you for all you've done for us and the people of Key Biscayne.
When this is 2 seconds, but when we're talking about different people to reach out to, I think I may have mentioned this before, but the group Rescue a Reef is doing some reef restoration, I think, off our shore where there once was one. They're this really cool group out of Rasmus that literally like plant coral onto faster growing pieces of coral, and I went and toured it. It was totally not my expertise, but fascinating just the same. And what they're doing may also help play a part in what needs to be done offshore.
Rescue a Reef?
Rescue a Reef, and the person that I met with there was called Dalton.
Great.
He's young and he's just like Cher. He's got one name. He's Dalton.
Good enough for me.
All right. Well, thanks very much for coming. Thanks to everybody who participated. And look forward to moving this along.
Thanks.
Let's go.
Madam.